trusted love this far, trusted all the way. My name is Matthew Kroll.
And unbow your head, sister. My name is Shahir Dowd.
And this is the only podcast about movies, specifically the film If Beale Street Could Talk.
Matt, if Astoria Boulevard could talk, what do you think it would say?
Oh my God, our alma mater street?
Yeah.
It would be in Greek.
Oh, yeah, true.
Whatever it said, it would be in Greek. And it would probably say something along the lines of, why are all these new restaurants here?
True. Why are these new buildings here? Or maybe just get out.
Get out. Yeah, that could be too.
Don't tread on me. Something along those lines.
I mean, that's a very New England statement.
Oh, really? Is that what I always thought Don't Tread on Me was like a George Bush Sr. thing.
Maybe not. Whatever. So for whatever reason, there's a snake on one of the flags up there, and then it's like, don't tread on snack, don't step on snack, and it just sort of like.
You're right. Yeah, it's the Gadsden flag.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what that is.
You know.
If you know what that is, if you, our listeners, know what that is and want to tell us what Don't Tread on Me means, among other things, you can email us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at onlymoviepod, as our listener Ray did this week.
Hi, Ray.
With, I believe her... Oh, listen to my voice.
Whoa.
It's a little early. I believe her list, I apologize if I've got that gender wrong, but she gave her list of Christmas movies for those who hate Christmas. She had listened to our holiday episode and wanted to chime in with her Christmas movies. And they included Krampus.
Yep.
You guys just did a thing on Extra Credits about Krampus.
We did. It's such a fun episode.
Okay.
Oh my! It's like all of the midwinter myths that Krampus sort of comes from, and we try to decipher where Krampus originated in mythology, and it's pretty cool.
Well, there was a 2015 movie, which I have not seen. Jack Frost.
Oh, Jack Frost.
A 1997 serial killer genetically mutated into a car wreck on the way to execution.
Well, he's genetically mutated into a snowman via a car wreck. Yeah,
so he's basically Child's Play,
but a snowman.
It's like Jaws. Just don't go near the water. You know, with Jack Frost, just melt him, right?
Yeah, but what if you're only in cold climates?
Like, wouldn't you just stay by the fire?
Yeah, but for instance, here's the thing.
Yeah.
A very packed snow isn't going to instantly melt when it hits heat.
Right.
So, like, he could kill you and then melt and then get away. Like,
he also seems fairly pliable. Like, you could just kick him and, like, tilt him to puddle.
Let's be very clear. Magic snowman.
Oh, right. Magic snowman.
Yeah.
Not
just regular, because if it was a regular snowman, it couldn't do the stabbing.
I gotta see this. I gotta admit, I'm very curious about this now.
Yeah.
The other one was The Ref, which is the, what is that, a Dennis Leary film?
Yes.
I remember that. It's where he kidnaps two people, ties them up.
It's like a home invasion, but then it turns into a buddy comedy.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
I don't remember it being a Christmas movie, but I guess it is. Edward Scissorhands, a classic, great choice.
Sure.
Love that movie. Silent Night, Deadly Night.
Yep.
Gremlins, Black Christmas.
Oh, Gremlins is
so good.
Oh.
Well, I wonder if Gremlins holds up. Like, that's the thing. I haven't seen that since that period of time in my life.
So I remember back when I was a little kid, I always liked Gremlins 2 better than Gremlins, because Gremlins 2 is just like pure candy.
That's where they take over the TV station, right?
It's like a whole mall building TV station thing.
Yeah.
Also, the NES game, surprisingly good. But they like, it gets rid of the horror of Gremlins and goes pure slapstick.
Right. Which was kind of the fun part of Gremlins. Like,
I guess.
Yeah.
I think there are some scary parts in the original Gremlins. You know what? We should review Gremlins.
Joe
at some
Dante
point.
film. I just remember the other thing about Gremlins is it's got such a great setup. You know, like going to the Chinese store to buy it.
The
They're getting
Mogwai. Oh my God!
The rules and everything.
I walked by. There was a store that looked exactly like because he walked. It was a store that was in a basement thing, and there was the stairs down. And I remember in the movie you could sort of see into the shop where they buy the Mogwai, where they buy Gizmo.
Yeah.
And I was walking actually in Chinatown to meet some friends, and I saw this store that I was like, is this where they shot that? And I want to go back.
Was it shot in San Francisco?
I think it probably was.
I can't remember.
But it just brought back all of the Gremlins memories.
Oh, so good. I wonder if it would actually hold up or not. I'm not too sure. But it also inspired one of the best episodes of Treehouse of Horror of The Simpsons, where you could buy your Mogwai and a frozen yogurt.
Yeah, for the Frogger.
Yeah, the Frogger. That's exactly right. Yeah.
I think we should review Gremlins at this point.
Oh man,
Not today.
No, because we still have requests that we haven't gone to yet.
That is right.
I want to finish out this list.
Sorry.
Santa and the Ice Cream Bunny. I do not know this film.
Yeah, I don't,
from
Ray, I don't know
1972.
what you're talking about.
I'm just going to read her note about it. Probably one of the most head-scratching films I watched in 2018. Felt like it was literally 6 hours long, but just bizarre enough that I may put it on again for background noise. Okay.
All right.
Scrooge, the 1970 version, not the Bill Murray version that we like.
Interesting.
This may be the most Christmassy film on the list, but Scrooge sings about how he despises people, and then the entire town dances on his coffin in a musical number. Sold. And finally, the 1966 version of How the Grinch Stole Christmas. I'm guessing Ray might not be there for the new Benedict Cumberbatch version.
Probably not.
Yeah.
You're a mean one, Mr. Cumberbatch.
Thank you very much for that list, Ray. We really appreciate it. We still have our top 10 of the year to come up as well. We've received a couple of lists of what people like for their top 10s or what they want for their number one. Again, you can email us in with a voice memo. We will play it.
30 seconds or less voice memo. Your number one film. Let's do this.
Yeah. The pick, we have one voice memo already, and the pick is going to be...
Is the pick going to shock me?
I'm not going to say.
Don't say it.
No, I'm not going to say it.
Don't say anything about it. It'll be a nice
It's
surprise
a really interesting one because this person basically gives what their film is and then goes out of their way to explain why it's not a great movie. But it's going to be interesting. Anyway, again, onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com or at onlymoviepod. Matt, now, instead of Astoria Boulevard, If Beale Street Could Talk is the follow-up from Barry Jenkins, the director of the Oscar-winning 2016 film Moonlight.
Yes.
A film that ended up number one on my top 10 list of that year, very highly on yours.
I believe it was number two.
Two, something like that, yeah.
I'd have to go back.
So a movie that I kind of, at this point, I was like, it's a movie we just have to see.
Sure.
Absolutely have to see.
Yeah.
I also kind of did a little bit of So I absolutely loved Moonlight. I'm fascinated by what Barry Jenkins does because Moonlight, I think, was so transcendent as a film. It is only his second movie. His first film, Medicine for Melancholy, was a $12,000 little indie,
right?
Which I have not seen yet. But I heard was kind of enough clout to get him Moonlight, and Moonlight was kind of the surprise of the Oscar season, which is that it was, even in his own words, he described it as a film that he never intended to go to the Oscars and win Best Picture.
Right.
And if you remember, controversially, it
almost didn't.
It almost didn't, which is a fun clip from Warren Beatty. So I was really curious about this, and this is an adaptation of a James Baldwin novel from 1974, and I hadn't read any James Baldwin. So I decided this is always a bad thing. I think, in my opinion, reading the book before seeing the movie always makes the movie worse. It's very rarely do I ever
it makes your perception of the movie worse.
Yeah, very rarely have I ever read a book where I've gone into the movie right away and appreciated the movie more because I've read the book. The only example I can think of, and it was from when I was 12 years old or something like that,
sure,
is The Silence of the Lambs.
Okay.
Where the movie was just as good, if not better, than the book. Have you ever had that experience? Have you ever is there any book to movie example that you can think of? I mean, I think I think good examples are the Marvel movies, where I think the movies oftentimes are
clean up the stories that are old and kind of trite and a little bit wonky in certain spots. Sure. Yeah. To be honest, this is gonna come at me, nerd brethren, but I will actually say The Lord of the Rings. I think the movies are superior to the books, and I know that's sort of in a Tolkien-esque worship society. That is not something you say. I think. Obviously,
I've never read the book, so I'm curious.
I think the way the books the tropes and the ideas that the books deal with from a societal standpoint are far stronger in written form. Right. But if I'm thinking about just sort of a pure enjoyment, right. I think the films do exactly what films should do with novelization adaptations, especially things that are as complex and just so much minutia as Lord of the Rings.
Right.
And it lets you know and makes you feel that this is a huge spanning world with everything's been figured out.
Right.
And I never doubt that anything in that world has not been fleshed out. Even though the film doesn't show you everything all the time. It always felt to me like an actual planet, for lack of a better term, and never just like, and here's a scene where they're running in the woods, and here's a scene where they're at the keeps and things. Like, it's just it always felt lived in.
Right.
And
I think I remember reading that the biggest omission that I really liked was, or that was really appreciated, was Tom Bombadil.
Yeah, but here's the thing about Tom Bombadil.
No, like having him taken out of the movie
I
was
know.
like a good example of why the movie is a streamlined version of the
Right,
book.
exactly. And everyone has their favorite characters in whatever their stories they're ingesting into their brains. So I feel for those whose favorite character is Tom Bombadil just not be in there.
Yeah.
Although he shows up in The Hobbit, doesn't he?
I think Radagast.
Radagast. Yep,
Radagast
sorry. Yeah, Bombadil does not.
I'm not. Being from New Zealand, I should be like really invested in the lore of Lord of the Rings. But
Also,
I'm not.
oh, well, it's funny because this is this is the weird thing. Lord of the Rings has become a New Zealand thing now.
Yeah.
But he didn't write it in
No.
New Zealand.
No,
Like, it's not based. It's just because New Zealand is the only place beautiful enough to shoot most of it.
Almost threatened not to be with the Hobbit. They almost took it away from New Zealand. They said, "Look, we could do." This is a really fascinating story. Lindsay Ellis has a good on YouTube has a really good 3-part series explaining what happened with the Hobbit. But there was a moment where basically Warner Brothers threatened to take Lord of the Rings away from New Zealand and shoot it in Ireland instead because they just filmed Harry Potter there. Really fascinating story about how politics can, like how politics and culture can collide in really interesting ways. It's a very, very fascinating story. So yes, you're correct. New Zealand has somehow, I think what it is New Zealand has capitalized really effectively on the success of Lord of the Rings. So that, there's a lot of Lord of the Rings tours in New Zealand. Where I used to mountain bike on a daily basis is one of the locations for Lord of the Rings.
Right.
And I used to mountain bike there before it was a
You were there before the elves got there.
Yeah, and now whenever I mountain bike there are signs up now about it being a Lord of the Rings location. I only think about Lord of the Rings when I ride that area.
I want to watch. I need to get some nice Blu-ray copies of Lord of the Rings.
I own the extended editions
on Blu-ray.
Yeah, because
let me borrow that.
Yeah, you can borrow that because they were on sale and I felt patriotic.
There's a gold box every once in a while on like Amazon or something.
It was
where
like
it's like $20, and I was like, all right. I remember when those things were like $150.
Yeah, and I bought it thinking, oh, one day, one long winter's day, I will sit down and put these on.
It feels. I know we're getting off on a tangent.
Yeah, we've really walked far away from the Beale Street.
We've gone farthest from the Beale Street home that we've ever been.
Yeah.
But let's go back. I could talk about Lord of the Rings forever. That's my example of a book that, or films that I think made the book stronger. Though, and I wonder if this is true with Beale Street. It's something that, and it's kind of the same reason the thing you brought up with the Marvel films. These films, I don't think, at least up to Beale Street, we'll decide if this fits into there, could not exist if the original works, or could not exist in such a heightened form if the original works hadn't exist in either their elongated form or maybe their forms that not everything entirely worked, or like it's when a creator looks at a different piece of work and says, I love both. I love everything about it, not just the great stuff, but the flaws, and then it figures out what it is that loves about the entire piece, and then they kind of morph it and turn it into something that's their own vision.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it fails too. But what do you think this was? Now you've read the novel and seen the film.
Yes.
So I know it's a little early, but can I ask what version you think is the more? It's weird because I have some thoughts about how this movie functions, but let's say the superior form of the story based around both enjoyment and the point.
Okay. I think I want to tackle that question a little bit later because it's a good question, and I think it's going to be the centerpiece of the way this discussion goes. Okay. But to kind of backtrack it a little bit, I think I've talked about this before, but Alfred Hitchcock had this thing which he said, a novel shouldn't be the best version of that story. Like, he doesn't want to adapt perfect novels, and he talks about how when he adapted The Birds, for example, I think it's a Daphne du Maurier story. He read it once. He thought it was okay. Yeah. But he thought the reason he adapted it was that he thought it had potential. And he says he always stayed away from stories where he thought the book version was where he thought the book was excellent. He said those are films not to adapt.
Sure.
And his reasoning is this, and I think it's a good guideline, not in every case, because like for example in Lord of the Rings is a masterful written trilogy and somehow managed to be a masterful written film. But his reasoning was something along the lines, and I may be misquoting Hitchcock for somebody else here, but he said a novel should be the broad brushstrokes of an idea, and the film should fill in the details of those brushstrokes.
So kind of the opposite of what I said.
Yeah, well, and
Thanks,
I think
Hitchcock.
Yeah, but his notion there is that movies are obviously a different language than the written word, and do different things, and can give you a tactile sense of the world that the film that the novel necessarily can't. And so he kind of wanted to find novels where the broad brushstrokes were there, and he could fill in the world. Now, there's a sort of counterpoint to that, which is that a lot of his adaptations were also kind of slightly ethereal and weird, and kind of did give you this sort of impressionistic sense of what the novel kind of did as well. So it's a really tricky balance to achieve, like the other one I think about is Upton Sinclair's novel Oil, which got adapted into There Will Be Blood.
Right.
And I think the interesting thing about that is that There Will Be Blood takes a really specific chunk of Oil and adapts just that slight story, almost to the point where it doesn't feel like it's an adaptation at all. He just took kind of one thread out of it. So the reason I'd say that is that in terms of novelization, novel to film, If Beale Street Could Talk is a very good adaptation of the book. The thing about it is, when I read the book, I read it and said, this is going to be a really tricky adaptation, because the book doesn't shout, adapt me to it. Like when I read it, it didn't really feel like something.
You were like, oh, I really need to see this on the screen.
Not only that, but then that was kind of leading to my point about how I kind of felt that, oh, maybe this could be an interesting adaptation if you really like ripped apart the seams of the book and rearranged it and made it your own. And I think he does. Barry Jenkins did talk, I've listened to an interview with him on the Ringer podcast where he talked about how, that's what he really wanted to do. He wanted to own the book in his own way. But this is a very good adaptation of that book. But I think the thing we're going to get into, and it's sort of an answer to your question, is I don't necessarily think that's a good thing.
Okay, let me ask you this straight up, because I have all these questions and I'm so curious.
Yeah.
Is the structure of the book
the nonlinear structure.
The nonlinear structure the same as the film?
Very similar.
Okay.
Very, very similar.
That felt
there's obviously differences, but it's very similar.
So I was guessing that was the case, because that feels very important to. It's important to what the film is trying to say, I think. The film, this is something, and it's hard to get into without getting into a ton of spoilers, so I don't want to deep dive into this yet. But I had an interesting relationship when sort of thinking about afterward and dissecting this film. I mean, I'll pad out the time here a little bit, because because the technical stuff I do want to talk about too, and that's something we can talk about without getting into a little bit of spoilers. Holy shit,
right?
Is this film gorgeous?
Oh yeah, it's beautiful.
It's like as I get older, I am becoming increasingly fascinated and in awe when a director and a cinematographer can make mundane shit look mesmerizing.
I think one person to forget in that is the colorist in this film. I think the colorist
that is very true.
Yeah, is a very key component in this. And the colorist name is Alex Bickle, I believe.
You're 100% right, and I apologize for
no, not a thing.
No, but it's a good call.
So unique to this to both Moonlight and this.
It's so interesting when I am caught up in there's a scene where they're with Dave what's his name, Franco.
Yeah,
Dave Franco.
Yeah,
who plays like a landlord, and they're thinking about like moving into a spot, and they've had trouble finding a place to live, and it's like a mundane, rundown old mill building that they're going to turn into apartments, and it's just gorgeous. And I'm like, this is the most bland scene probably in the entire movie, and it's still mesmerizing.
Before we move on, tell us what If Beale Street is about from the IMDb.
Oh, of course. I mean, it is. This is pretty apt. A woman in Harlem embraces her pregnancy while she and her family struggle to prove her fiance's innocence of a crime.
That's absolutely correct.
It is.
Good synopsis.
And that is a hard this is what happens synopsis.
Well, I think the thing that's really difficult about If Beale Street Could Talk is how, like I mentioned the word ethereal before, but I think how ethereal the film and the book are. It is like the plotting of the film. Well, yeah. You can hear it in my voice already. It's really hard. It's hard for me to like distinguish between the two experiences because I read them right beforehand, and I kind of got into a sort of a James Baldwin rabbit hole, which is really fascinating. He's a writer I had read a lot about, but I'd never read one of his books. Before this, I also watched Raoul Peck's documentary "I'm Not Your Negro," which is kind of a loose adaptation of a book that James Baldwin never wrote. And it's really interesting to figure out James Baldwin's worldview. And that's so important in this novel because the novel is kind of doing two things. The novel and the film are doing two things, which is on one hand, it is a out and out pure love story.
Right.
On the other hand, it is an illustration of Baldwin's worldview, which is this sort of anger and frustration at the state of America for African Americans.
Yes.
Baldwin was famously outspoken about this topic. He actually, the thing about I Am Not Your Negro, which is this adaptation of this book, is that Baldwin kind of places himself at the center of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Medgar Evers, three civil rights activists, in the late 1960s, who were all assassinated, and he kind of uses them as a metaphor to kind of balance out his ideas about how America actually operates and works, and how frustration is the wrong word because Baldwin is just angry about it. You know, he thinks and he thinks all African Americans, all white people, all Americans should be in rage about the state of racial divide and racial inequality in America. And he famously moved to Paris to write because he was just so frustrated with America.
Yeah.
Interesting side note, the If Beale Street Could Talk was previously adapted in France as a movie called Where the Heart Is. So just kind of an interesting thought about how stories get translated or moved from countries.
Did that story take place in France?
It did, yes.
Do they have a lot of this? I know nothing about France.
France has racial politics as well.
But like as toxic as America?
If you look anywhere right now to the sort of ongoing debates about immigration in France, almost, they almost had a national socialist, not national socialist, but a sort of an almost Trumpian figure win the last election. So
they dodged the bullet. We stepped in front.
They slightly dodged the bullet. Whatever your knowledge of French politics are.
Write us in, onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com. Teach Matt about France and politics.
Have you ever noticed we always that's our go-to phrase when we don't know something?
Well, no, because here's the thing, and this is something I'm gonna go off on a tangent very briefly, and I'm sorry. I think it is absolutely wonderful that we literally could pose a question on this podcast to our listeners and be like, could you explain to us the racial politics of France? Because we don't know them. And 9 times out of 10, one of you comes back to us with like information. You've become better for me and more interactive and just more enjoyable than like Googling stuff at this point, because like next week we're gonna have an email back and it's gonna be really lovely.
It's so funny. We've just figured out that this whole podcast experience is basically
just to teach us,
or just to avoid Google.
Well, that or we are actually sentient AI that are feeding off of your information that we'll use slowly to take over the world one day.
At any rate, going back to that, I apologize. We went down the side tangent there, but I think the interesting thing to think about is the divide between what this story is trying to do, which is that it is telling sort of an almost Romeo and Juliet kind of love story, but it is framing that Romeo and Juliet story or Tish and Fanny story in the context of American injustice, which is not unusual. Many novels have done that, but it is a unique one in that the injustice here is almost incidental and expected. So the thing I think I want to emphasize there is that, and this, I guess this kind of gets into spoilers if you've seen the movie at this point, is that the injustice doesn't get resolved in this film. And in fact, the injustice kind of almost hangs on to this couple's love story tangentially. Like, there is an argument about like why Fanny was accused of this crime. There are sort of wonderful vignettes in the film of like how it's impossible for him to have committed this crime. But that injustice, there's no courtroom scene where that injustice kind of gets really taken to task. We don't the film doesn't even really like illustrate what happened. You know, and I think the sort of interesting thing is it is a little confusing at times as to what actually happened.
Well, because here's the thing,
Yeah.
and this is what it took me a long time to deal with, and by a long time I mean like the last 48 hours, because I saw it 2 days ago.
Yeah.
But like I was having trouble wrapping my head around my feelings about the film,
Right.
because it does not function in a way that I am accustomed to when emotionally resonant storytelling is done to me with film.
Okay.
And by that I mean I guess we're going full into spoilers.
Yeah, let's go
it's a little bit
spoilers
earlier.
here, yeah.
The end of the film, like what you said, the injustices are consistent and inconsequential, and the film doesn't have definitely not a happy ending, and some might argue that it just doesn't sort of end, it just sort of stops.
Yeah.
And we all know my history with non-endings on this podcast. This was never a moment where I was upset with the film for how it ended.
Right.
Because it made me think about it more and more, and it ended in the sort of like, well, and that's all the time we have.
Right.
These people are still going to have a ton of injustice. It is just basically like, how did I put it before? The standard narrative structure for something like this is you want a resolution, be it good or bad. That's what you've been trained, and that's what your mind is expecting when you're told a story like this in a medium. And this film doesn't do that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't give you the catharsis of having a actual legitimate sort of like, and then they lived happily ever after, or things are terrible and that's the end. It's just like, no, this is life for these people, and it will always kind of be life for these people in this America.
Yeah.
And
which is only a few, the life they're talking about is only a few blocks from where we live.
And it's made specifically, almost I think pinpointingly, to give the audience that feeling of like, yeah, this is where you live, and there's no this is real life. There's no catharsis in it entirely.
This movie could be scored by Childish Gambino's "This Is America."
Yeah, and it's the point of this film, and it took me a bit to get to it, because there's lots. For instance, narratively, the love story is beautiful. There's no question, but there's a lot of sort of like leftover shit in this that like I was like, why is this after the film? For instance, the very powerful scene where they invite the other when they first find out that she's pregnant, then they invite the family over to talk about it and blah, blah, blah. And Fadi's in jail at this point. And the mother is a very religious person, along with the two daughters being a little bit prim and proper. And the dad's has his own issues. Yeah. Some very strong and bad. And I was like, oh, these characters are going to be important in this story. Yeah. And then, like, especially the mother. The mother, I want to find the actress's name. Her
name is Anjouan Ellis, and she plays Mrs. Hunt.
Yeah.
Anjanae, sorry.
Such a powerful performance just in that. She's in one scene. Yeah. And I was like, they're not bringing her back. Like, why did... Okay, and then I realized as it was going, and we had these vignettes of great characters. We're traveling with this couple and their trials and tribulations through the injustices of the American legal system, and then like it's just basically like showing you all of the shit they have to deal with, but you never get a moment of closure on any of it. Right, and I think that ultimately is the point this film is trying to get across. Yeah. It's obviously beautiful things such as these two people's love does exist, but love doesn't conquer all. Love makes all tolerable. Right. And shit still goes wrong and is bad and always rolls downhill. And it took me a lot of thinking to sort of get over my own, like, well, this movie didn't end in a way that I found satisfying. It's like, yeah, no shit. These people's lives don't end in a way that they find satisfying. Like, it was a way an emotional punch was delivered to me in cinema that has not been done, I think, before.
I mean, you know, the non-ending ending is actually a very specific thing.
No, I'm not talking about structurally. Yeah. I'm talking about effectiveness. Right. Like, and I don't. It's. Like, the entire point of this movie, I think, is supposed to hit you right at the end after you thought about it. Right.
So there's an interesting, and again, I've purposely read the book because I wanted to like figure out how the adaptation worked differently in the book. The unfortunate problem about that is we do the thing that I hate that we do sometimes, which is we review the film we want it to be instead of what the film actually is, because I'm comparing it to a different source.
So your brain film.
Yeah, exactly. So that is I sort of set that up front, which is a faux pas from critical analysis kind of view.
So don't pay attention to what Shahir is going to say.
Exactly. And it's very difficult for me because this film has 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. Critics whom I admire are loving this, are talking very highly of this film. Not as sort of in the same way as Moonlight, but as an Oscar contender, as a top 10 of the year kind of thing. I'm not in the same boat because I think while I do think the film is beautiful, while I think it's a very well made, well constructed, well conceived adaptation of this particular book, I think the problem that it has for me is that it's too close an adaptation of the book and it doesn't rip apart the seams. Now, I think the reason is that the book is kind of anti-structure in a way, in that it is told in this sort of like flashbacky way, and it is unresolute in terms of the ending. Now, the thing that the kind of the beauty of the romance, though, is what basically is the palate cleanser for the injustice that happens. And the way to think about the structure of this is that you are supposed to be invested in the love between these two characters, such that when this injustice happens, it's not about the injustice, it's about how it splits these two people apart. And I think the novel was really effective in doing that because, for example, the scene where which you described, which is the meeting of the two families, is kind of built up quite a lot in the novel. And it's kind of the centerpiece of the novel.
Really?
Yeah, it's a really big scene in the novel. It lasts a long time, and
that was in the first third.
Yeah, it was in the first third, and it happens kind of quickly in the film. I think that like when I was reading the book, I was like, oh, this is the scene that I want to see played out in extreme detail in the film, because this feels like the biggest thing. The oddest thing is here. I will say, in terms of spoilers here, when I read the book, the two main important scenes that I thought were going to be key to the film's success were the sex scene and their first sex scene and the meeting of the families. Those were like the 2 points where I was like, oh, and the mother, Regina King, going to Puerto Rico. Those are kind of the 3 key set pieces that I thought were important to this. And it was weird because that wasn't what the most successful set pieces for me in the film, or the most successful scenes in the film, involved Brian Tyree Hill's scene where he meets, where he comes back to explain what he's been doing, like what prison life was like. Right. And the scene that you described, which is when they find the apartment with Dave Franco. Those were the 2 key scenes that I thought really, really worked in the film. And it's interesting. Brian Tyree Henry, I apologize, got his name wrong. Now, the thing that was interesting there is those scenes are really short in the novel. Those 2 scenes. So like him describing, Brian Tyree Henry's, I think his name's Daniel Carty, describing what prison was like, is a real like couple of pages kind of thing. It's very powerful, but it's very, very short. Whereas in the film, it's elaborated and expanded upon much further. And I think Brian Tyree Henry is amazing. I think he's like one of my performers of the year at this point. He really owns that scene in a way that leaps off the page. And it's the thing where I think Fonny and Tish are cast really well in this film, and everyone's cast really well. But to me, Fonny and Tish didn't leap off the screen the way that they leapt off the page. And that's that sort of false equivalency comparison that I don't want to do too much. But it is something I felt, which is that the novel is really sexy. It's really sexy, and it's really like you're really invested in the romance between these 2 characters, because you see them kind of like go from childhood all the way up to this point, and you see the dynamics of the family relationship before you get into that, evening drinks kind of explaining the pregnancy scene. So you understand everything that's going on in that scene before you walk into it. In the film, you kind of just walk into it. Mm-hmm. And I think it sort of, for me, the film suffered because of that. Because I didn't, while I thought it was beautiful in all the ways that Barry Jenkins proved that he could do beautiful scenes, it never felt like it went beyond the page and leapt off the screen.
Here's what I'll say about it, because as we've sort of described, the love story of this piece is the center of the entire thing.
Yeah.
never did I feel while this was going on like an intense sort of passion or sexiness. Even in the sex scene, it never was that to me.
Yeah.
What it felt more like to me was more love in the sense, or like love and devotion in almost a mythological sense.
Yeah, and in a way it doesn't feel real, right?
Well, kind of. Yeah. But I was on board for that. And maybe, and again, that might come from reading the book, experiencing a thing, expecting to sort of feel that sort of same thing. Because I was just like, oh, this is a mythological tale of love and hardship, basically. And the way it was structured was very ethereal and very sort of, and the way it was shot and the way it was colored, it all felt very floaty.
Yeah.
For to simplify that feeling down as simple as I possibly can. And so I didn't get that feeling of like, I guess intensity is the wrong word, because there were intense moments in this film, but at the same time it was never, you know what it was? Nothing in it, in that aspect from the love story, felt visceral. Right. Or tangible.
That's exactly it.
It all felt. This is what it is. It's not the carnal. There's never sort of any carnal love, which is sort of half of what love might be made up of, depending on who type of person you are. It is all ethereal love. It's all sort of like your brain's love or your heart's love, and not your body's love. That's a weird way to put it.
The way I would put it is that the characters felt like ideas for characters as opposed to feeling like characters.
They felt like it's a myth. I mean, it's what it's that's what mythology does. It takes the aspects, it takes like the pinnacle or the epicenter of what a feeling or an idea or a belief is, and like makes it into a character or two characters. That's these two characters.
And again, I'm going to fill in the holes from the novel, but again, these are sort of deficiencies in the way the film kind of presents these ideas.
I don't know if it's again, I don't think it's a deficiency for me.
Well, let me put it to you this way: is that I can fill in the holes from the novel, but the problem is that I don't think that the film does a great job of giving you the impressions that I got from the novel. I'm just kind of using the novel as backstory.
But now, didn't
you just say that you thought that it kind of, they felt mythological but not real?
But I like that.
Oh, okay.
Like that's my point. I think this is where reading the source material and having a different, especially if the book was pointing the way the love is portrayed in a bit of a different feeling direction. I don't have that the other way it was told to me, so I couldn't possibly make the choice of which one I like better. Right. It could also be what our opinions are of those type of things. But this felt to me, case in point, Moonlight. Felt like a real, like every emotion in that film felt physical, felt very like in the human sort of like deep down in your guts, sort of feeling. This was more like your heart and your mind, and the frustration and hardships that your heart and your mind feel when presented with situations that this film does. I really like that, because oftentimes I find in intense, I know we always use Romeo and Juliet as like the sort of like the baseline, but there's been a million romance stories. Yeah. A lot of these romance stories that are so like sort of physically visceral, it's funny because a lot of the times that's where the problems in the tale lie, not in the way it's told, but like what happens to the characters. Like the characters give in to their urges or whatever, and then bad shit happens because of it. Right. This movie, that doesn't happen. Bad shit happens because society lets bad shit happen. Right. And again, it goes back to sort of my central thesis about this. About at first when I finished this film and I left, I was like, oh, I don't know if I liked it, because it kept introducing super interesting characters that I thought would be in it for the long haul, and then it drops them. Yeah. And then I thought there'd be some sort of resolution one way or the other, and it doesn't. Yeah. Or it gives you it, but it's like in a voiceover, and then you see like an epilogue. Yeah. And but then I realized that like, no, this is pure. It's a mix between sort of a mythological love and slice of life storytelling that is basically trying to give the viewer, in the most remote sense that it's not possible to actually let someone else experience someone else's life and hardships, but like the feelings it gives you based on all of these things, like here's some amazing stuff that pops in and goes away, and here's an ending that's not really an ending. It's just like, oh well, fuck, this keeps going.
Yeah.
It gives you the like a 1% of the feeling of what that might actually be like for the people that are dealing with it.
Right.
And I thought that exercise itself was incredibly powerful, and therefore once I glommed onto that idea, I no longer really had problems with the standardized structure stuff that I normally would, because I was like, oh, structure isn't the point.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I completely went back.
You've gone.
I'm so sorry. We jumped off of the sort of the aspect of the two characters' love of
No, but I guess what I'm jumping back and forth here is whether you felt the film was effective for you.
100%. But here's the thing. Here's the weird thing. Not when I left the theater.
Huh.
It sat with me for a while, and I was and you know what? This is what it is. I was normally, if a movie doesn't work for me, I'm like,
yeah,
and I don't think about it.
Right.
But there was so much technical acumen, cinematography, directing, acting, editing, sound design, music, the scoring.
The score is beautiful.
Where I didn't even actively, sorry everybody, I didn't actively think about it after the movie. Yeah. I inactively thought about it. I found my mind sort of going back to it. And without me, because a lot of times I'll go watch these movies and I'll be like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to think about, like, I'm going to set down an hour and like actually think about my opinions of this film. This wasn't one where I did that, because I found myself in my day-to-day life going back to it and dissecting it more. And I think probably around the 24-hour mark, like a day later, I was like, oh, the point is to make me feel like this. Like,
right.
And I found that sort of slow burn, like it was almost like the movie infected my brain. And again, that's what I know I said it before, like I hadn't experienced something like that before. I don't know if I have had that moment of like real, like where the movie doesn't instantly tell me what it's really trying to do. And that, but this, I like figured it out. And maybe it could also just be that I was slow, but like, I'm saying overall that from point of beginning of watching the film till honestly talking about it right now, that journey was incredibly rewarding.
Yeah. I mean, and I think I felt that way about Moonlight, for example, which is that it was a film that like, I remember really distinctly, I walked out of the film like not sure how I felt about it, but then I kind of whipped on the way home thinking about it, like it kind of, it seeped into my brain. And the more I think about it, the more that film kind of rewards itself with me. I kind of almost had the opposite impression with If Beale Street Could Talk, which is that I kind of watched it with a lump in my throat. Like I watched it going, these are just beautiful scenes.
Sure.
The performances are beautiful. Everything about this is working so well. But there was something about it which felt almost in a way two-dimensional to the film, which is that there is this sort of schematic structure to it, which doesn't entirely kind of dive into why these characters are important, and in the way that I think a movie should give us the tactile sense of how things work. Now, I don't think that is a failure of production, a failure of writing or directing, a failure of anything like that. I think it's just the difficulty with which this particular novel has to be adapted. And I think this is a very, very good adaptation of this novel. But it kind of, to me, I miss the essence of what I liked about the novel. Now, I don't love the novel that much either. Like, I think the novel kind of does a similar thing, which is that the novel takes a little while to absorb into your bloodstream to kind of really get a sense of what it's doing. It's beautifully written. Baldwin's prose is like mind blowing. But I think the thing for me is, for example, the family's meeting scene, which is that in the novel you get built up to, you understand who the mother is before you walk into that scene, and you understand the relationship Fonny has with his mother before that scene begins. So you understand why Fonny is attracted to this other family, or why Fonny has become such an important part of this other family's life. And they seem to have more affection for him than his actual family does. That is all built up in the novel so that you kind of get a sense of what that is. But when you walk into it in the film, I was just watching actors kind of do scenes that are beautifully done, but I didn't like get a deep impression of like the lives beyond those scenes or the lives beyond those words. And I think that was really sort of tricky for me to navigate. And I was like, I didn't want to do this thing where I was comparing the novel to the book, but obviously I was doing it. And it is a bad thing to do. And it puts me on a back foot before I start watching it. But I do think, my genuine impression of the film is that it is kind of touching the surface of these issues, and you are supposed to do the work for it yourself. And I'm glad that you had that experience, and I'm glad that you feel this way about it. I think I just felt that the film wasn't effective in basically summarizing those experiences as well as as well as I thought it could do. And I think the potential was that it could do it better than the book. And it kind of did it the same as the book for me.
And again, from what I'm gathering, because I'm very glad that you read the book, and weirdly that I didn't read the book. Because
yeah, no, I'm glad that happened as well.
I didn't do my homework, and
no.
I'm getting rewarded for it.
I think I did. I did it as an exercise.
Sure. It is so difficult to separate those things. I'm very curious as to what you would have thought if you hadn't read it, because it's not something that I glommed onto instantly.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that it did all feel sort of the word I keep going back to, sadly, is mythological.
Mm.
Now where it does break from that trope,
yeah,
and I think why it's so effective, and it's kind of a whiplash to my brain, is the fact of the myths have normally at the end of them clear things where you can be like, oh well, this is a story about trying to tell you why you shouldn't steal. This is a story about why, there's cultural value instantly. Myths are made so you can understand complex things simply.
Yeah.
This is something that is doing the same thing, but not giving you the M. Night Shyamalan driving up in a truck at the end and explaining the thing to you. It's showing you an ending that you will probably find unfulfilling, right, with the amount of detail that's gone into this so far. Because if you think about it, if you just look at this from a structural perspective, if this movie wasn't about the injustices that African Americans face in the United States, right? If it was about anything, if it was just about, if that wasn't at play,
yeah,
and then the ending played out like this, you'd be like, what?
Yeah.
You would be infuriated. It would have been a waste of your time, etc. But because a main character in this fucking movie is injustice,
right?
And at the end, injustice still wins. But it's weird. Injustice and love being these two sort of like ethereal characters in this movie.
Yeah.
Love is still persisting.
Yeah.
But injustice won.
Yeah, and it's weird because I think the novel is slightly more pessimistic about that, which is that in the novel, injustice kind of reigns supreme by the end of it, and becomes this overriding force, which almost not takes away from the love of Fonny and Tish, but also kind of destroys the family around them in sort of weird. I guess I can spoil bits of the novel right now, but like for example, Fonny's father commits suicide at the end of the film.
Jesus.
Yeah, which is a big
at the end of the book.
At the end of the book, and it happens like on the last page. It's just like, oh, and this happened, and we're like, what? I had to go back and read it like 3 times just to make sure I was clear what had happened. Also, like Victoria, the woman that Regina King's character goes to visit in Puerto Rico, suffers a miscarriage and is hauled away, and sort of like lost her mind by the end of it because of everything that's happened around her. She is the victim of this injustice, but is also kind of like being persecuted for her reaction to it.
Who was Oberyn to her?
Oberyn is kind of
I shouldn't call him by his
name. Pedro Pascal.
Pedro Pascal.
I think the idea there was that she moved to America with a white man, and had 3 children, but Pedro Pascal's character was actually her lover in Puerto Rico.
Oh.
But she'd come back to him kind of a broken woman
Sure.
or a different kind of woman.
We never saw them in the same scene, so
No.
I never knew who they were to one another.
Yeah, and it's explained much more clearly in the film.
In the book.
In the book. But yeah, and the book and the film kind of have these sort of like really interesting side characters that pop up and do like one scene. Like and Daniel Carty, the character played by Brian Tyree Henry, is one of those ones where he pops up like a few pages, and it is I was like, I do kind of want to see what happens to that character, what happened to that character. But in the film, he really leapt off the page. He really jumped off the page and became this moment. And I think for me, his scene was the centerpiece of the film.
Here's the thing. He is the most human character in this entire movie.
Yeah, it's a performance that kind of like takes the takes the written word and breathes life into it in sort of really strange ways.
Because everyone else in the movie up to this point is really, this might sound like a little bit of shade, but again, I think it's almost a strength of the movie, at least the style of story it's trying to tell, is very one note.
Yeah, it is, and I found that the film for me suffered because of that.
I like, because again, it felt like a myth, and therefore I was like, I get it. You're doing like real hard analogies for things. For his character, though, he felt like a human being in the world. I keep going back to like this thing, but like in the world of like the gods or something like that, right? Where he's just like this guy who is like most humans. And the reason he felt human is because I know that guy. Yeah. I know the guy that gets into trouble, but you can still have an amazing dinner with him. But also he's got a dark side, and he's also kind of loud and annoying from time. Like it's not like it's a multifaceted person.
When he says that line, it's like Malcolm X said, "The white man be the devil," and he says it with this sort of like low, head hung low kind of thing. I don't remember that line being in the book, but I guess I just watch I Am Not Your Negro, which is a lot about Malcolm X. And when he says that, I was like, I was just blown away at how effective just the delivery of that line was and how good that line is.
So he was a grounding force, and I think honestly, maybe now that I'm even thinking about it further, maybe the fact that that's kind of the midpoint of the film. That I don't know if that was on purpose or whatever, but like if we were getting too floaty and you needed something to like tether it all down to like realize that like he was a great balm that let you know, like, yes, it's all about these characters and the injustices that they're facing, but these injustices go beyond, even though you could logically figure this out, of course, but like this is like, nope, here's another tangible example of how this shit.
Look, I think the thing of, like I've been dancing around is talking about the adaptation and how the adaptation worked, which is a real structural thing. It's a real like production thing. It's a real like, technical thing. But I think let's talk about what the film and book is actually trying to say. And I think that scene is interesting because what his character, Daniel Carty's character, is saying is how horrific prison life is for men of his age, and also like he says, I wasn't actually committing a crime, but they just get you. It's like this threat that is constantly pervasive in their lives, and they have nothing. There's nothing they can do to stop it. And then when he talks about like there are things that I've seen in prison that I will dream about till the day I die. Yeah. And the thing that because of the way the structure is set up, when we're watching that, we're realizing that Fonny doesn't know that life, and he is being foretold of the life he is about to live. And I think that's why that sort of on a mythological sense, that scene kind of is powerful. And the interesting thing is we don't ever see the horrors that Fonny like witnesses in prison or has done to him. But there's that moment later on in the film where Fonny and Tish are talking, and he, and Fonny finally breaks down. He's tried to sort of had this strong face about what's happening to him in prison, but he says, and his voice breaks, and he says, do they know what's happening to me in here? Like, do you realize what's going to happen to me in here? And we never see what's happening to him in there. And I think that the thing that scene does is highlight that this injustice is just this force of evil in these people's lives that is inescapable. And I think that's what the whole film is trying to get at. And again, if you look at Baldwin's point of view about America and the reason why he left for Paris and the reason why, his speeches on America and the plight of African-American men in America are extraordinary kind of not treatises about how American injustice should fill us with rage, but somehow has filled us with complacency. And that's the
complacency in America.
Yeah, but isn't that horrifying? You know, complacency about injustice is probably more horrifying than injustice existing at all. You know what I mean? Like, and I think the thing, you know, like that this film is kind of getting at is that this injustice just exists and it is pervasive. And by the end of the film, where they're sitting in prison and he hasn't got to know his son. You know, like his son lives this life, and his son. You know, the scene at the end is entirely not in the book.
Okay,
that is an invented scene, and you know, like the son draws a picture or writes some word. We don't see what it is, but I think what we get the impression from Fonny's, you know, rendering of it is that he realizes that his son only sees him as a prisoner, or you know, like in this way, and that is this thing that has been ripped away from, because you know how happy he was to be a father, you know, how happy he was to this idea that he was going to be a father, and that is now going to be entirely clouded by this experience. And it's not an experience that is like a one-time experience. It is the experience that his son might have, and his experience.
Well, that is a one-time experience.
Well, no. Here's what I'm saying. That, like, his African American son is going to have to be aware that this could happen to him, right? It's not a one-time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant. Well, I thought you meant like you only get one childhood. You know, of your
No. I
okay,
mean, if you're an African American in America, this is as true as it was in 1974 as it is in 2019.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it is true in 2019. We have to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this film is kind of gently nudging us towards. And the tricky thing is that I think Barry Jenkins and Baldwin kind of do really well is that they're trying to put that message in a context of a love story, and they're not trying to make that you know, they're not trying to make this film preachy about the injustice, which is very well could be. Like if you compare this to Black Klansman, for example, another film that we reviewed this year about historical inequality in America, historical racial inequality in America. I think that film is much more didactic about what it wants to say about race and politics and history in America. It actually is much more direct about those things. And I think there's a gentleness with which Barry Jenkins and James Baldwin are both trying to tell this same story, but frame it in a real way that is saying injustice exists and is going to happen.
And this film, as opposed to Black Klansman, is one I think will actually really stick and again gestate and become. I feel like this is a movie. If Beale Street Could Talk is a film that if the right people see it, maybe not right away, but will have more of a actual like longer term effect on perception of these issues than say Black Klansman will. Because Black Klansman, again, the story in the film Black Klansman does wrap up, and then Spike Lee gives us 5 minutes of real hardcore education.
Yeah.
And it's effective in the moment. In that moment, I was like, holy shit. But until we just brought it up, I haven't thought about that particular moment.
Yeah.
I will think, because this makes this literally, no matter who you are, and I guess this kind of rolls into a bit of my final thought, is no matter who you are, this film takes a love story, turns it into a myth that is built to be entirely relatable to anyone, any human being.
Yeah.
But then the entirety of that experience is shadowed in something that a lot of people will not have to deal with because of the injustice in America, and that's sort of the again injustice that African Americans and minorities have to face in our current climate, in the climate that's kind of always been.
Yeah, it's not just the current.
No, I know that's but I'm just saying, like, in that climate and the climate that still exists now. So when you take those two things, and it's not presented in a like real harsh, like this is fucking like again, like sort of like that Spike Lee way, which again, that's an effective way for certain people, but I think a lot of people will block that more quickly.
Yeah.
This is a more sneaky knowledge feeling injection that I think could actually plant a seed that could crack open some mental barriers. And for that reason, I think it is an incredibly well-designed fable in a weird way that more complex than I am used to being told.
Right.
And I think that goes for just fables in general, but also film.
Yeah.
We've been trained. I've been trained by movies my entire life that there is a structure, there's a beginning, middle, and end. And even if that ending is a non-ending, that's sort of where it's supposed to be like, that's what wraps it up. This is something that literally just made me question, like, oh, that's it. But because of that, made me realize that the point of this experience is to continue questioning why this shit can happen. Things in real life do not wrap up cleanly.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the love or the experience that these human beings are having is any different than anything else that you're sort of experiencing. It's just, it was incredibly powerful to me, but again, not in the moment.
Yeah.
It was such a slow burn, and I really appreciated it. Now look, if I had to say what movie going experience did I like better, Beale Street Could Talk or Moonlight, it's still Moonlight for me.
Right.
But Moonlight does what I want a movie to do when I'm going to watch a movie more effectively, but this does more of a social inoculation.
Right.
Or balm or I guess what's the word I'm looking for? Medicine, in a weird way, that that I think we need, and I think that is important. And yeah, I don't know. I thoroughly enjoyed it for a lot of reasons I didn't expect to.
Right. So again, I'm torn between this because I guess I come from a slightly different place about film, which is that I've always thought film should be a commentary on our lives, and they should expand. Like for me, film is life, and it should expand into our world, and it should challenge you and transform you in sort of interesting ways. And that's so I'm really glad that this film gave you that experience. I think the film has the capacity to do that. I think the thing is, though, there is something about this film where it is slightly, in a weird way, stilted. And it is slightly it's very two-dimensional is the wrong word because that sounds pejorative, but it's basically doing the broad brushstrokes of a thing while not giving you not giving you the details of what's happening to allow you to fill the space for you to do that. Now, ordinarily, there are filmmakers that are masters of that, and I think one filmmaker that Barry Jenkins has been compared to, and I think has referenced quite a lot, is Wong Kar-wai.
Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense. And Wong Kar-wai is really great at kind of making impressionistic love stories, like In the Mood for Love, Happy Together, which I think is a clear antecedent to Moonlight as well. These are filmmakers that are able to kind of do that kind of language of film, which is broad strokes, impressionistics, which allow you, the audience, to like soak up in the atmosphere of it. And I think the problem here is that even Wong Kar-wai, Terrence Malick, Hao Shin-seo, can make films where you do get swept up in it, and you do kind of like there's a lyricism to it which envelops you and kind of just you're fine with living in it. And I just wasn't quite living in this film. I kind of was living on top of the film. And that may just be a function of me having read the book and done a deep dive into James Baldwin before walking into this film and kind of having half a film formed in my head before walking in. So I'm very much admitting that might be a failing of my viewing of the film as opposed to the film itself. So because I don't think the film fails. I just think it failed for me because of the point at which I was coming from to this film. But I've spoken to a couple of other reviewers that I like, and they kind of felt the same way. So and you mentioned yourself that there is this sort of like two-dimensionality to the characters, except for a couple of scenes.
And
right?
here's the thing: I think in this particular case, because of the way the story is being told, that is important. That's crucial to the type of thing that, again, the film wanted to tell.
Yeah.
If the book might have wanted to tell this story in a different way and have a sort of a different way for it to get its ideas across, but I think this is a weird thing, but like we've been talking a lot of like floaty or myth or whatever. Like characters are one-dimensional in this movie. They are either all good or all bad, except for his friend when they're having dinner, except for Daniel.
Yeah.
Because they're like, no character is given the time or the screen presence to do that. Other
Here's
than
the
him.
case in point: is we haven't actually even talked about Tish in this film. Kiki Lane's character, because Tish doesn't she feels kind of there more than a character, and you know what I mean. And
there's no change in Tish. There's really there's you don't actually get to experience actual change in
and she's the
in
main
Fawny either.
And these are the main characters to hang us all on. And there isn't.
They're the placeholder, in my opinion, for
there's an extraordinary scene, and this has been the year of movie births, and there's an extraordinary movie birth in this movie.
Yeah.
And I to the point where I was like, I don't even know how they did that shot. It's so beautiful. Like we come up out of the water from underneath the baby in a sort of almost baptism way, and then it comes up to realize that this is the actual birth, not a baptism. It's mind blowing, how good it is. And I thought Alfonso Cuarón's Roma had like one of the like most powerful birth scenes this year, and this kind of did that as well. So I don't know what it is about cinema this year. Maybe all film directors are like remembering childhood or remembering birth stories or something like that. Anyway, but we're supposed to like we come up, and I should feel Tish's love and presence and feel the relief and how much the sort of the joy of having a child in amongst, like washes away the pain of the reality going around her. But it just, like it doesn't quite happen that way. I felt more for Regina King's character in that scene where she was seeing her grandchild, because of that monologue that she talks about at the beginning, where she was like, this child that's coming is your grandchild. It doesn't matter how he gets here. All that matters is he's here. And I felt more for her response to that scene than I did for Tish. And I think that is a sort of interesting problem that I had with the film. Yeah.
I found it weirdly a strength in the exact reasons why I think you didn't like it. While it does, I'll even say straight up, fail as a like particular emotional.
Fail is the wrong word. I don't want to use that word for this film.
I think the portrayal of Tish's emotional thing fails in a sense of feeling actually like human.
Yeah, nuanced and human.
Because humans are nuanced.
Yeah.
But what it does succeed entirely with, because it's consistent, is the sort of... because it's not nuanced, it can be, and it's what great myths do, it could be every birth. It could be every child, every mother having
every
a child.
Child born in America.
But right? Like that's why I think it's highly effective, and that's also a reason why I think characters like Daniel, characters like the mother, like get those sort of human moments where our main characters do not, because they're the ideal.
Yeah.
And it's important to this film that they are the ideal, and it doesn't matter because everybody is going to be weighed down by the injustices of the play.
That is actually sort of the sort of secondary part to this film, which I think is important as well, which is like we should be we're in a place where I think we're celebrating Black excellence. I think that's a phrase that has come up in the last few years, and I think it's an important phrase, and I think this film kind of celebrates Black excellence. And one of the things that I thought about when reading the first half of the book is how loving this family is, and how like unified
in different ways too. Again, the sister, is a perfect example.
The sister is beautiful, and like the fact that like Sharon will
Teyona Paris, I believe.
Yeah, will go to Puerto Rico to find this woman to try and convince her that her potential son-in-law, like it's such a this family unit is so beautifully structured and so wonderful to watch, like it's so delightful to watch. And I think the film itself is an example of Black excellence, like it is an example of celebrating Black lives in a way that I think we may sometimes forget, because we forget because we frame those Black lives in didactic stories about injustice and and politics, and not see those lives within. And I think this was an example of how that can work without being didactic. Now, that's sort of contradictory to what I've been saying all along, which is that the overall experience, though, to me was still a little stilted, but I don't think it's a failure. And it's a really strange movie that I think I'm going to be wrestling with for a little while, and I want to see it again to kind of reconfigure my thoughts. And I think my opinion will change of it the further away I get from the book.
I think that's apt.
Yeah.
I look, you've poisoned your mind with your own thoughts.
Yeah,
like that's kind of what.
but but I think I wanted to purposely do that because I'm so taken by Barry Jenkins. I'm so like Moonlight. I would argue is probably one of the finest American films to be made in the last like 30 years of American cinema. And I'm so taken by this filmmaker that I want to know his process because I want to I want to aspire to the things he does. And so when I chose to read the book, it was a choice to like see how does this person do these changes. But I think the problem there is that my filmmaker brain takes over when I'm reading something and I'm starting to think about how I would construct it. And the difficulty there is I was like, I'm not sure how I would do. I know how I would do scenes, but I'm not sure how I would do this film. I think this is a wonderful film and a wonderful experience. And I'm really, like talking to you in the way you experience this, I think is convincing me more about the power in it. But I will be honest in that watching the film did have kind of mixed feelings about it. I will say, the cinematography by James Laxton and the colorist Alex Bickle are, they're profoundly beautiful. Some of the best work this year. If Alfonso Cuarón made black and white beautiful, these two have made color beautiful. And the score by Nicholas Britell is extraordinary. I've had it on repeat for the last couple of days as I've been working at home, and it's just. I actually fell asleep to it last night. I was reading. It's also perfect like nighttime music.
Yeah.
And I fell asleep to it, and I just woke up kind of while it was still playing, and I felt wonderful. It's so. It reminds you like the power of great music in cinema and how music can change and transform a piece in profound ways.
Sure.
So I just want to point all of those things out. This is high art of the nth degree, but I still felt stilted.
But you hated it. No.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, this has been the only podcast about the film If Beale Street Could Talk. Side note, I was very confused by the title because in the beginning of this movie, it gives like a thing, I think straight out of the book, right? It
No,
felt
it's
like,
not in the book.
No? It felt like it.
For
Where it
the
talks
longest
about
time, I thought Beale Street was in Harlem, but it's not.
That's the thing. It's in New Orleans.
Yeah.
And then I was like, and as the movie was going, I was like, oh, it takes place in New Orleans. And then I was like, wait.
No, but did you read the whole thing?
I did.
So what did you get the impression?
I thought because the first sort of paragraph of that in the beginning, it talks about like it was a street in New Orleans where jazz was born and da-da-da-da-da-da. And it talked about all the different places that it sort of went to or something along those lines. I forget the words that it said. But
okay.
For whatever reason, I glommed onto that and I was like, oh, there's a story that takes place in New Orleans. And then as it was going, I'm like, this looks a lot like New York.
This is Harlem.
And I was like, and it's Harlem.
The idea there, and I think it says it right at the top, is that every city has a Beale Street.
Oh yeah. But again, the only city name that's what it was. The only city name in that blurb was New Orleans. So I was like, oh, this is setting me up to take place in I don't know. Again.
So James Baldwin lived he was born in Harlem, but he talked about the idea that there is every city in America has an African American town. And he's basically saying Beale Street is for him ground zero for that.
Yeah.
And Harlem has this town as well. And the idea there is, and I think it comes in the title, If Beale Street Could Talk, is that if these streets could tell us the stories that happen in these streets, what would they tell us?
I mean, this film is telling you one of those stories. Or perhaps telling you an amalgamation of all of them.
And it's telling you a story that is about these people being swallowed up.
Yeah.
And being abandoned. And that is that's powerful about what it is.
Well, Shahir, when you were not explaining the written word prologues to films to me that confused me when I saw them, when can folks find you?
When can folks find me? They can find me at any time on my website.
That's not true. Not at any time.
No, at any time you can find me on my website. I will be there as a little like Bandersnatchy icon. That's going, do you want to go any further?
Okay.
ShahirDaud.com. That's ShahirDaud.com. Matt, when you are having profound transformative experiences at the movies, where can people find you?
You can't find me at the movies having them because I didn't. I had it 2 days later, or the continuation of it. But
so perhaps on the subway?
Yeah, you can find me it was slow burning my brain at MATTHEWKROL.com, my lives and works. Also Skeletor, the number 4, PREZ on Instagram, or Emperor MSK on Twitter. I've been told I should slow that down so people can actually hear what the F I'm saying.
Oh, it's not just Emperor.
Also, check out Extra Credits. We talked a lot about mythology. Check out Extra Mythology. We're doing. We just did Krampus, and I believe next week we will be diving deep into Celtic myth, which I'm very excited for.
Pronunciations must be difficult.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A lot of noises. And then also we just did an amazing thing. Ryan from blipsounds.com, which is a great website about sound design and a whole bunch of stuff. They just wrote an episode for us on Overwatch and the art of audio design in video games and how it can be informative. Amazing. We got to do some really fun stuff with that one because we did extra animation by Nick DeWitt. It looks amazing. Plus, I got to do a lot of stuff in edit with our sound editor, playing with like what audio can do. So there's a lot of stereo tricks. There's a lot of like different hertz of sound range. There's a whole bunch of trickery in that episode that we put a little something extra in there.
You should listen to it with your headphones on.
Yes, stereo headphones, 100%.
Dolby? Did you mix it in Dolby Atmos?
No, it's not 7.1. We just don't have the budget.
No, Dolby Atmos is like 30.1.
Great. Well, I barely have a speaker and a half in this room. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Next week, we don't know what we're doing.
We're getting too close to okay, so here's the thing.
Oh, Jesus.
Onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com.
Right.
Twitter @onlymoviepod.
All that.
I want to we do this thing every year, which is that I want to make sure we get in a few films before we get to our top 10 list.
Sure.
There's only one more that I got to get in.
What is it?
Burning by Lee Chang-dong.
Okay.
Have you got any more that you want to get in before we do our top 10?
I don't think so. I will tell you this. It just doesn't fit into this at all. But I will be going to see Escape Room this weekend.
And that's going to make your top 10 list.
I don't think so. Well, that was also 2019, so it doesn't count. But
no, it can't count.
Okay.
No, because
that's right. Our rules are weird.
Our rules are weird.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then maybe it's gonna be my number one.
I think so.
But we should get one or two more in. I don't. This is episode 197,
and we're getting close to our 200th episode.
Should 200 be our year in review?
It could be, but it could also be separating art from the artist. Which we're
hey,
still
listen.
working. There's so much stuff we're doing and not doing and trying to do while we're still trying to put out a show every week.
But listen, just listen to us complain about it every week, and maybe one day it'll become real.
Here's the thing. We both still love it. At least I'm speaking for both of us.
I
right?
know, of
we
course.
both still love it, and that's why we're still doing it, and why we've rocked on to almost 200 episodes without even noticing it's happening. Like right now, we're trying to cram in more before 200. Anyway. I love doing this.
But enough about how the soup is made.
Yeah.
We'll have you hear us next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.